Hello, my friends, and welcome to Hanover Square, New York City. I am Mrs. Q, and welcome to my parlor. I'll wait a few minutes for more people to join us. I know it takes a little while sometimes for people to arrive. Give a few more minutes. And when you come in, please say hello so I know you're here. And I can see your messages in the chat. I think we'll have a very fun and informative evening tonight. Hello, Mr. White. My dog Rex. Hello, my dog Rex. And Mr. Davis. Hello, it's nice to see all of you. Hello, Miss Frederick. This is my private upstairs parlor where only my closest of friends and family members would, of course, be visiting with me. Oh, the good old rebel is here, Richard and Janice Hamblin. Hello. And if you're wondering what this strange object is behind me right here, you notice there's also a fireplace right there. And that is an item if you're sitting in the chair with the fireplace to the side of you. I'm so sorry, this camera, I can't even move. This horrible camera goes out of focus. I have to turn it off and back on. I know this looks terrible, but just give me a second. And there it goes back. If you're sitting with your side to the fireplace and you're a lady and you don't want your face to get hot, you would put this between you and the fireplace and it blocks your face from the fire so you don't get hot. And I forgot what it's called. Sparrowhawk, it's been so long. I'm so glad to see you. I mean, it's been so long since I've seen you in person. I hope you're well. Mr. Telek is here. What do you do when the sun sets early like now? Put on some candles and lanterns, and maybe Mr. Q and I will talk about the latest book or article that we've read, or maybe we'll read or sit by the fire, something like that. Try to make the best that we can with the light that we can provide for ourselves here. Miss Kane is here. Hello. So tonight I have something very exciting to tell you about, and that is that the identity of an author who has become quite famous or infamous here in the city, depending upon which side of this issue you find yourself, his identity has been revealed to me by my good friend, Mrs. R. And hello, Miss Silver. It's nice to see you as well. But before I tell you his identity or how Mrs. R learned his identity, I should tell you about the articles that have made him such a local sensation. And these are articles regarding something called the Tea Act. I hope you all remember the Tea Act. I think in your time you may have learned that the Tea Act was a tax on tea, when in reality it was a removal of a tax on tea. Now, there's been a great deal of written debate over this here in the city, with many pamphlets and broadsides being written. And often the ladies come into my shop for me to read and explain the broadsides to them. Miss Kane is here. Thank you, Miss Kane. The ladies come into the shop for me to read and explain the broadsides to them because, as much as I am pained by admitting this, many of the ladies in this town cannot read well enough to understand all of the verbiage in the broadsides, as the broadsides are written by some of the most educated men in the city, and they're really meant for other educated men. So very few ladies have the ability to read them, and even fewer to understand the concepts contained within. So they often come into the shop so that we can discuss these things. When they approach their fathers, if they're single girls or brothers, or their husbands for an explanation, they often get none, but just dismissed as, well, these things are too complicated for your ladies' minds. So they come into the shop and we discuss them, as I'm grateful to my own father for having me educated quite well so that I can understand these documents and explain them to the ladies and help them to become a part of the general discussion over these important issues like the Tea Act. The Tea Act is not a tax on tea. It is the removal of taxes on tea. I know that sounds like it's not such a big difference, but if you think about it, It truly is. It's the removal of a tax on only one specific type of tea imported here in America, and that is tea imported by the British East India Company. Now, this means that the East India Company can move their tea from England to America without paying the export duties leaving England or the import duties coming into America, as all goods are affected by these import export duties. And this is the way the government raises money to administer itself and to provide the necessary services. So by withdrawing the taxes on only that tea, that makes all of the other tea more expensive. Now, the other tea still remains the current price that it's been, but the East India tea now becomes much, much less expensive. The idea being that if this is put into effect, the East India tea being less expensive means people will buy it and prefer it over the other teas because all of the tea comes from the same place. China only exports from one port in Canton, and everyone must get their tea there. So whether it's Dutch tea or in English tea, it all is coming from the same place and is the same tea. So the thinking is that we will all buy the English tea because it will be so much cheaper. And why then would the parliament want to do such a thing, do such a favor for a company as to withdraw their duties on their tea? Well, that is the interesting part of the story, my friends, because the East India Company, in its adventures in Asia, has managed to nearly bankrupt itself. And not only that, but the East India Company owns a great deal of money to banks in England. The banks would like their loans paid back, of course, but also the East India Company has issued stock. And there are other investment items that are based upon the value of that East India Company stock. And I think in your time, you may call those derivatives. So if the East India Company stock goes down a large amount, many people will lose their investments, right? And there's a large real estate market in London currently, also based on this financial bubble, all based on the value of the East India Company. Mr. Facemeyer is here. Welcome, Mr. Facemeyer, who's watching from Manassas. So the East India Company needs help. They have also financed, I just remembered something I should have had to show you tonight, and I regret that I don't have it, but I will explain to you what it looks like. The East India Company has contributed a great deal of money to the campaigns of members of Parliament, right? Those are the members of the lower house, the House of Commons, because I'm sure, as you know, the House of Lords is a hereditary house. Those seats are inherited over the years in one family. So House of Commons are elected and they run campaigns and they need money to run campaigns. And one of their big campaign contributors is the East India Company. And in return, of course, they get special consideration. Now, there is a wonderful cartoon that came out recently, issued in London, which shows a member of parliament taking his oath against bribery. And while he's signing his oath, in his hand behind his back, he's accepting a bribe from a gentleman of the East India Company. And up on the wall next to him is a list of bribes and their different prices, the price in Commons and the price in Lords. So even in England, they are well aware of the corruption that occurs between the East India Company and members of Parliament. So the East India Company, now needing some help, went to their supporters in Parliament and looked for some relief. And the idea then was to remove the duties on the East India tea so that more tea could be sold in America, thus bringing in more income to the East India Company to help them with their financial situation. And a great deal of debate broke out here in America over that idea. Now, some ladies, of course, come in the shop and we talk about this, and some ladies will say to me, but Mrs. Q, why shouldn't I buy the English tea if it's much cheaper and I am on a budget? Why would I not buy the less expensive tea? Why would you encourage me to still buy the Dutch imported tea, which is much more expensive now than the English tea? The English tea now giving me a little bit of extra money that I would have in my budget for other items. To such ladies, I explain to them that it isn't that the tea is cheaper, it's that it makes a near monopoly, or how would I explain the word monopoly to them, which they don't know? It means that the East India Company has a protected part of the commerce, that they have prices so low that no one can compete with them, that there is no competition. And if there is no competition, there is no quality. As I explained to them, as they go around to look for fabrics. They may come to my shop and look for fabrics, and they may go down the street to Mr. Mulligan's to look at fabric as well. And Mr. Mulligan and I, although we are friends, we certainly compete for business. So they may get a price at Mr. Mulligan and then come to me and say, "Oh, Mrs. Q, I see you have this. Well, Mr. Mulligan is selling it for this much. How much will you give it to me for?" That is called competition, and it's called free market. And if you lower one price so much lower, lower than what anyone else can afford to sell something at. So, for instance, someone else opened a shop similar to mine and was selling linen at less than I could even afford to buy it myself. They would put me out of business, right? They would have no competition. And that's what's happening with the East India tea. No one else can now compete with them. And the ladies might say, "Well, I still don't see why that is so bad." And I'll say to them, "Well, what if other products were given that advantage, making them so cheap that there might be no competition? Maybe no competition for what it is your husband makes in his shop." And then they begin to understand the argument, or at least the beginning of the argument against the Tea Act. Now, explaining this is somewhat difficult. Explaining the contents of the broadsides is a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to go over some of what's in these broadsides and tell you who the pseudonyms of the authors are at first before I reveal who they are, to give you an idea of the debate that is going on here in New York. Now, I want to start with a series of things that have come out called the alarm. And oh, LB Girl is here. Hello to you, Miss. I'm very glad you joined us tonight. So the alarm is a series of very long articles that have been published about the East India Company, about the history of the company, founded by Queen Elizabeth I. They've been around a very long time. Their connection to the royal family, their connection to the British aristocracy, and of course, their connection to the banks. Its operation as a monopoly on trade with Asia. And the author has written about the company's disgusting, inhumane treatment of the people of India, including torture and starvation, to make them bend to their will. Now, the author of The Alarm also reminds us of the economic distress being suffered in England as a result of the East India Company's financial schemes in China and India. And I won't go into the whole financial problem that they're having because it's a little bit complicated, having to do with the Chinese demanding payment in gold and the East India Company getting into a scheme for acquiring gold from India. And it gets to be rather complex, but I think in your time you have a word for it. I think you may call it a Ponzi scheme, if you know what that is. So the average people of England, the common people of England, are always in a state of economic distress, and the Parliament rarely cares about them. Who cares about them? All they do is vote once in a while, and if we get enough campaign contributions and we say the right things, well, of course, they'll continue to vote for us. And then after they vote for us, they really don't mean anything to us anymore. What we're really worried about in Parliament is our benefactors, our financial donors, our large donors, bankers, real estate investors, landed aristocrats, the big merchants of London, those people who are really contributing to those campaign contributions and also offering other types of shall we say, gifts to the members of parliament. And it seems that all of those people I mentioned above, the bankers, aristocrats, landowners, merchants, all seem to own stock in the East India Company or in those investment derivatives that I mentioned. So everyone has an interest in the success or the lack of failure, I should say, of the East India Company. Bank of England finds itself the holder of much of the company's debt. So now the people who normally don't care about the common people see their lifestyle under threat of change and deterioration. So now they are suddenly worried about the East India Company. And they know that if the East India Company fails financially, they will all sink with us. I'm sorry, sink with it, not with us. Although someone is going to argue, well, I'll get to that we will sink with it as well, which I, of course, disagree with. We'll get into that in a moment. The author of The Alarm tells us exactly what they have done to save themselves, requiring we in the colonies to rescue the East India Company by forcing us to buy their tea, which is not fresh, high quality tea that they would sell in England, but old, rotten, and stinking tea. So to the debate now, and the gentleman whose name I'm going to reveal to you tonight, thanks to my wonderful friend, Mrs. R. Mrs. R, you know, I have mentioned over the years, Mr. and Mrs. R own a printing press, and they are printers here in New York. Mrs. R is one of my closest friends, and she is the one who revealed to me one of these authors. We have Mr. Lavelle says, if you don't take Jesus out tonight, you're going to lose that boy. Yes, yes, you're going to lose that boy. Is that a song? I'm not sure what that is. Maybe someone can explain to me what that is, because of course I am 260 years behind you and not always familiar with some of your comments. So please explain them in terms that a woman in my time can understand. So this debate broke out here in the city with a very eloquent, persuasive, beautifully written broadside. Do you know what a broadside is? A broadside is an article that is written and published on a large sheet of paper and then placed around town on walls, hung up in taverns or coffee houses. Sometimes, if someone has enough money to pay for them, they might be placed under doors, but they're put all around where people can read them. You can also buy them in the print shops, and they are an opinion piece, the opinion of a writer or writers on an important topic or a timely topic. And broadsides come out all the time. They're very frequently written. But as I mentioned before, they are generally written by the educated men of the town for the educated men of the town. So it can sometimes take a little work for others to understand what's in them, but many people are willing to explain to their family members and friends what the gist of these broadsides are. So we have one that comes out, and here it is. I have a copy to show you. Hold on for just a moment. I need to open my backgrounds that I'm going to be sharing with you tonight. And one came out. This is the first in the series, to the worthy inhabitants of the city of New York. And broadsides frequently start out this way, to the, inhabitants of New York, the worthy inhabitants, the respected inhabitants. And we have a comment by Mr. Burns. Good evening. Loved your Halloween message. Thank you for educating us. I'm so glad you liked me. It was so much fun to be a spirit or a ghost in your time last week and to see what the city looks like in the future and to see so many people I know buried in Trinity Graveyard. Very strange, but it was quite enjoyable. So to the worthy inhabitants of the city of New York by someone who calls himself Poplicola. Now, Poplicola is for Publius Valerius Poplicola. Let me move my notes right down here where I can see them a little bit better. Rearrange my documents here. Publius Valerius Poplicola from the Roman Republic, who was known to be a friend of the people. Now, if you know history of Rome a little bit better, you know that he is also one of the original founders of the Roman Republic. So his broadside starts out with this wonderful first paragraph. And you listen and tell me how persuasive this gentleman is. He says every good citizen will be inclined from duty as well as interest to love his country and to be zealous in advancing its welfare. So true, isn't it? 'Tis to the common exertion of the common wisdom and power in the pursuit of a common good that he feels the security of his life, liberty, and property. And he will, of course, feel himself under an obligation of contributing his share to the promotion of public happiness. The man who makes the general interests of the society of which he is a member the prevailing object of his actions justly merits the honorable title of a patriot. This is the only ground on which a claim to so distinguished a character can be founded. It's a wonderful opening, isn't it? Where he says, of course, this is what a patriot is, someone who puts his or her country first, someone who cares about the general security of life, liberty, and property, and the common wisdom that brings those things about. It's a very persuasive opening paragraph of this broadside. And then Poplicola goes on to say that we who oppose the Tea Act are a small cabal, a group of greedy merchants who have our stores filled with Dutch tea, and that it is our private interest and not our freedom that we seek. In other words, it is because we have inventory of Dutch tea that we oppose the sale of the English tea, because we still want to make the profit on the Dutch tea. And in the end, he calls himself a friend of liberty. Now, he also presents in his broadside very persuasively about the East India Company and the success of England and the empire as a result of the trading of the East India Company. And he goes on to say that we in the colonies have our success as a result of being a part of the British Empire. We have the right of the common law applied to us, the rights as subjects of the crown, the rights to elect our own local legislatures, whether that be our town or village or colonies. We can travel freely. We have our own courts. We have the right of trial by jury by our peers, and so many other things, because we are subjects of the crown and part of the British Empire, falling under the umbrella of the British Constitution and the British Bill of Rights. And so we are all happy about this, and we all love being a part of England because of this. And I would say that that is, in general, true. So he's still very persuasive, isn't he? But then he takes another step, and he suggests that it is our duty as patriots to support the East India Company and buy the tea, because if the East India Company fails, the British Empire will fail, and we will be alone. And we will be left here without the protection of the British military, without the protection of Britain in any way, and we will be left here on our own in terrible lawlessness and anarchy. My dog Rex says a grocer is a swindler. My dog Rex, I am a merchant lady. Do you suggest that I am a swindler? I certainly hope not, sir. So very persuasive until he gets to that little section where he says, if the East India Company fails, we will all fail here with it. So I think in your time you have a phrase, too big to fail. Now, if the East India Company were to fail, would we fail with it? If Britain was to fail, would we fail with it? Has become now the question of debate. So we have moved on from the tea to, would we cease to have all of the things we have if we were not a part of the British Empire? And most of us say, look around, look at America. Who built what's here? Did we build this? And my father and other people's fathers for the last 150 years? Or did England build it? Well, if we built it and the East India Company fails, and London has a financial failure. How does that affect us? We're still sitting over here doing what we've been doing all along. And so someone now debates Mr. Poplicola. And this gentleman calls himself a student of the law, which, of course, in your time means he is a lawyer. And we can only speculate about who this lawyer might be. And I will refrain tonight from speculating on who this lawyer will be, but I am going to tell you in a few minutes who Poplicola is. So the student of the law responds, and he says, "The man who employs his talents to direct his countrymen in the path of truth or guard them against impending evils is a blessing to his country. But he who prostitutes his pen to deceive his neighbors into the dark mazes of error, or to lull their virtuous apprehensions asleep on a matter of utmost importance to their safety and felicity, is a curse to the community and a disgrace to human nature." Poplicola has further informed us that the English tea, as he is pleased to call it, is much better than the Dutch tea, though he has not been so kind to tell us why it is better, since they are both shipped at Canton, China, as I mentioned before. It may chance that the tea, like Madeira wine, grows better by sweating several years in a warehouse. And this, my friends, has gone back and forth with a number of these. Poplicola wrote another one addressing a student of the law, which then provoked a gentleman who calls himself a mechanic to respond to that one. And before we know it, there is a pile of these now. And I think I have the one from the student of the law for you to see. I do. This is the one from the student of law, and this is only the first of 4 pages. And the original is about 4 pages as well. So 4 pages of rather dense print, but very interesting to read. So this has sparked now a general debate here. Now, I think it is the mechanic. We use the word mechanic a little bit differently from you. To us, a mechanic is just about any gentleman who is a laborer and works with his hands. We also may call them leather shirts. So these are the gentlemen who are artisans and who work with their hands in some way. So a gentleman who calls himself a mechanic, and I must say, very well educated and eloquent for a mechanic, that doesn't mean they're not, it just means that I can't imagine which one this is. He responds by saying, if your neighbor were to start some business of his own, and like the East India Company, hire his friends and family members and politicians and many people that he pays but who do no work or who are lazy, and he has taken loans to open that establishment and he fails, should you, my friend, have to pay his loans? Should you have to buy the poorly made goods in his shop? Or should he be allowed to fail? And of course, he should be allowed to fail. And this is the argument the mechanic now puts forward about the East India Company. So this, as I mentioned, has become not only a big debate here in New York, but throughout all of the American colonies, whether or not we should buy the tea. In New York now, the argument has gone beyond whether we should buy the tea or whether the ships carrying it should even be allowed into port, whether they should even be allowed to unload, whether they should be allowed to unload the tea and other things they are carrying. So now the gentlemen here are saying, if the ship is carrying any of the East India tea, we won't unload anything on it, which makes me hope sincerely that none of the things I am expecting from Europe are carrying any East India tea, or I will lose my inventory. But I do, in spite of that, support that effort. So now, who is this eloquent, very persuasive gentleman, Poplicola, who the student of the law says, what does he say to him? He says, Hold on a moment. Let me find the quote because it is so wonderful. He says, "A man who employs his talents to direct his countrymen in the path of truth or guard them against impending evils is a blessing to his country. But he, like Poplicola, who prostitutes his pen to deceive his neighbors, is a disgrace to human nature." So, who is this gentleman who may either be a great man, very persuasive, and giving us advice on how to save not only England, but ourselves, or the disgrace to human nature? Well, let me tell you the story of who he is and how I came to learn that. Now, I mentioned my friend, Mrs. R. Mrs. R. and I have been friends for many years. She and her husband have a print shop a couple blocks away in Printing House Square, where we find Mr. Gaines' newspaper and we find Mr. Holt's newspaper and we find Mr. Rivington's newspaper. Now, my friends, the R's, do not print a newspaper, but they print all sorts of other items that people need. And one day, Mrs. R., while setting type, realized that she had misplaced her horizontal separator. And after thinking about it for a time, she told me that she remembered she had loaned it to Mr. Rivington across the street, who was unable to find his. So she took herself across the street to Mr. Rivington and reminded him that she had lent him one of her horizontal separators, and could she please have it returned to her? And of course, Mr. Rivington, and I have his picture for you if you do not know who Mr. Rivington is. Here's Mr. Rivington, a fine gentleman, Mr. Rivington. I know him quite well. Mr. Rivington, of course, said, "Why, Mrs. R., I forgot all about it. I'm so sorry. Of course, let me fetch it for you." And he went into the back where he sets his type to get it. Well, while he went into the back, Mrs. R. noticed that the Reverend Dr. John Vardale, one of the teachers at King's College, you call that Columbia University in your time, that Reverend Vardale of King's College was sitting down and he was reading the proof of a document. And the document turned out to be Poplicola number 3, the third he wrote in the series. Of course, Mrs. R. looked over his shoulder and she said, "Well, hello, Reverend Vardale," greeted him. And of course, he said, "Well, good afternoon, Mrs. R. What brings you here today?" As he kind of turned the document away so she couldn't see it that well. And she explained she had come to retrieve her horizontal separator. And that time, Mr. Rivington came out with the item and returned it to her. And they all bade each other farewell. And Mrs. R. went back to her shop, continued her typesetting, but when she was finished, ran over to tell me that there is a Mr. Lavelle, I have to mention to you that you're becoming rather inappropriate in my private parlor, and I must ask you to refrain from the awful comments that you are placing on YouTube. Please, why would you come to my home, into my private parlor in my home in Hanover Square, New York, and be disrespectful to me, a great and fine lady, and to all of the rest of the ladies who are sitting here and gentlemen? And I must ask you to refrain. Please, or I may have to call Mr. Q to remove you. I'm sorry, all of the rest of my friends. I believe this is the first time I have ever had to address someone in our salon in such a manner, but this must stop. It is not acceptable. Here I am talking about a debate between gentlemen of our time, an intellectual debate which is being held with great manners, verbal skills, trying to teach something. Your questions are inappropriate, Mr. Lavelle. They are not relevant to what I'm discussing. And you need not insult me by saying you thought I was smart. I guarantee I am. May I say, sir, I have been insulted by much smarter, much wealthier, much more important people than you. And you must either stop or remove yourself from my salon. This is absolutely inappropriate, and I will not tolerate it. Now, please, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, let's return to our subject. I'm telling you, the anonymity of your time has reduced people to the worst in their nature. Where in my time, since we face each other, we must be careful of the way we address each other. We cannot descend into such insult and ridiculousness. My goodness. So now, Mrs. R, yes, my dog Rex, I know he can be blocked, but I am giving him the opportunity to be a gentleman and to withdraw. To behave in such a way in the presence of ladies, certainly unacceptable. To insult a lady. Who insults a lady? Unbelievable. Even the worst of men in this town would not do such a thing. Mr. Vardill himself would never do such a thing. But back to Mr. Vardill, our author, who calls himself Poplicula. He is the Reverend Vardill of King's College, a fine professor there and mentor to the young men. King's College, you might know, is an Anglican college, and Mr. Vardill himself was a student there. At the conclusion of his own studies there, he decided to become a teacher himself and teaches under the tutelage of the great Reverend Miles Cooper. Miles Cooper, who you might know, I have mentioned many times, a great man, Miles Cooper. Whether or not you agree with Miles Cooper's position or Mr. Vardill's position, they are still fine, educated gentlemen in our town. Now, of course, I'm telling you that Mr. Vardill is Poplicula because you can't tell him I know. And I will tell no one else, as Mrs. R asked me to keep it to myself. But since you are so far in the future, now let's consider what Mr. Vardill writes as Poplicula and what it means that he is a reverend in the Anglican Church. I know in your time, churches and denominations and religions are not as relevant as they are in my time. But keep in mind, the Church of England, the Anglican Church, is the official church of the crown throughout the British Empire. So, of course, the political view within the Anglican Church will always support the crown, right? It only makes sense that it would. Oh, and I believe I have a portrait of Mr. Vardill for you here as well. Here he is. And he is born and raised in the city of New York. His father was a ship captain. So he is a New Yorker, just like me, born and raised here. Very much a New Yorker and an American. But as you see, he's an ordained minister in the Anglican Church, so his position will be in favor of the crown. So he writes very eloquently as Poplicula his true beliefs. I don't believe Mr. Vardill is lying to us. I think it is his true belief that if the East India Company fails, we in America will suffer greatly for it. But many of us don't believe that. So here we have an example of a free and open debate that we are having here in New York about the Tea Act. So the great Reverend Vardill. Now, once I found that out, I realized that another pamphlet that came out last year, anonymously written, of course, was also Reverend Vardill. And it is a debate with the great Reverend John Witherspoon, president of the College of New Jersey, which you refer to as Princeton, as Mr. Witherspoon wrote a pamphlet critical of having the Church of England send bishops to America. This is another very controversial subject that's being discussed now, is whether or not the Church of England should be able to have bishops in America, to which we say no. Keep in mind the Church of England, at least here where I am in New York, is only 17% of the population. So not very much at all. So there's a great pushback from all of the Presbyterian and other Protestant religions here against having bishops. So Mr. Witherspoon wrote about this, and Mr. Vardill wrote a very lengthy response to Mr. Witherspoon. And of course, none of us knew that it was these two great educators, great, highly educated men, great thinkers, and two men who truly love their country, America, debating in these pamphlets, and now knowing at least that one of them is debating on the Tea Act. Now, if I were to take a guess at who the student of the law is, I would guess it is either Mr. Livingston, maybe Mr. Scott. I don't think it's Mr. J. And it's a bit much now for to be Mr. Hamilton. It's an older gentleman, whoever it is. I would go with, oh, you know who it might be? It might be the gentleman of the city of New York from Huntington, whose name has just flown from my head. Another fine writer. He is a doctor from Huntington who has written many great things like this. Although it is rumored he may be the author of The Alarm, but many of these men write the same things. So I'd like to take us back to the beginning of me explaining these concepts and ideas to the ladies in my shop, as it is the fault of our education in our time and the belief that women cannot master these difficult concepts or ideas. Certainly, I have done it, and I still remain very much a woman. In my time, we have no debate over what the word woman means. I know you have some question of that in your time. I don't know how you reached that conclusion, but I am still very much a woman, and my brain works fine, not insane. And I know a few other women who are also very well educated and understand these, but most of our ladies do not. And so some ladies like me take it upon ourselves to help the ladies understand these important topics. Now, some of the gentlemen are not so happy about it because one of the last things they want to do is go home in the evening and have their wives ask them which side of the issue they're on and perhaps disagree with them. So I think some of the gentlemen may not be too happy with me doing this, although Mr. Q and I have no debate on these issues. We are on the same side of this. So something to think about, isn't it? Should the common people have to rescue any sort of failed company or corporation? The East India Company is a corporation, right? It's owned by shareholders. It has a board of directors. They are responsible to their shareholders. And should the regular people have to rescue them when they have not been responsible to their shareholders? Or should they have to suffer the consequences? Now, I hope that in your time you have not been tricked by this idea that something is too big to fail. It would pain me a great deal to know that you have been. And if you have been, perhaps now that you've heard my story tonight, you won't be the next time around. So thank you very much for joining me tonight. My apologies for my angry diversion, but it is not acceptable for a gentleman to behave in such a manner in front of ladies or other gentlemen. And since there is not a gentleman here in the room with me, I had to take it upon myself to handle the situation. So thank all of you for joining me again tonight. I hope you've learned something interesting about your past that you may not have known before. And oh, before I forget, please come over to Patreon, Mrs. Q History, and join my community there, where if you become a paid member on my Patreon, you don't have to be a paid member, you can join free. But if you become a paid member, I will be posting all of these broadsides and pamphlets tomorrow for you to read at your leisure to understand a little bit better about my time. And I think you'll be able to read them just fine. I don't think they'll be too difficult for you to understand. Miss Silver says, so great that I stayed on character. I was at an event, I have been at Let me tell you, I've been at so many events lately that I feel like I'm in character all the time. Last night, I went to an event you might be interested in hearing about here at our public television station. It was a preview of the upcoming Ken Burns 12-hour documentary on the American Revolution. And the reenactment unit I belong to, the 24th Connecticut Militia Regiment, was invited to go. And it was very nice to be there. I wore a very wealthy 1780s ladies outfit. It was all different types and layers of silk. Um, I wore an enormously ridiculous hat. I was almost embarrassed to wear it, but it was correct for the time. And my hat was a big success. But even more of a success was being able to represent some 18th century people at this event honoring this upcoming series. Now, we only saw about 25 minutes, 25 minutes of selected scenes from the series, but it was very well done. I think it's coming out in about a week. It's very well done. It's very beautiful from what I saw, and I think you'll probably all enjoy it. So we're all looking forward to that being released, and then you can make up your mind whether or not Mr. Burns, is presenting the story properly. But as I always say, and as I've said with the Chernow Hamilton book, everyone, documentarian or biographer, has a right to their point of view. And you may agree or disagree, but they have the right to their point of view. And if you don't agree with the point of view, it doesn't mean their work is not worthwhile, just to remind all of you. And we have some, Mr. Fahey says, an excellent presentation. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Someone said, Mr. Davis, no disrespecting to Mrs. Q. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Miss Frederick says, here, here. Miss Frederick, I missed you last night. You did not attend. I was hoping you would. Perhaps I'll see you next week. My dog Rex says, I would blame King James for the unlawful desegregation of the majesty of women. Well, King James was the Catholic king, and I won't get into that now because it is time for us to say good night. Mr. Fahey is wondering what Miss Silver means, but that I stayed in character. I'm not sure which comment he's referring to. Oh, that someone was a low-class thinker. I would just say that he was a rude gentleman. And, somewhere along the line was not taught the manners that a gentleman ought to have been taught. And I can't presume how that failure occurred. So thank you all for joining me tonight. Sunday night, I will be on republicbroadcasting.org talking about, I'm not sure what yet, but I will be there at 9 p.m. Eastern Time talking about some aspect of the American Revolution. And of course, next Thursday, I'll be right back here with you again. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful week until I see you again. And keep learning about the American Revolution. It's a great story. It's all of our story. Thank you so much and good night.